The morning fog still covered the market square when the Duke saw her. Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Thornfield, had not planned to stop in Dornfield Cross that morning. He had been riding since before sunrise through the quiet roads of Somerset. Riding had become his habit over the past 3 years. It helped him think. It helped him escape the silence that followed him everywhere. The village market was slowly waking as he approached. Bread carts were opening. Farmers were setting up wooden stalls. A woman was hanging bundles of lavender near the fountain. Sebastian should have ridden past the square and returned directly to Thornfield Hall. Papers and letters were waiting for him there, responsibilities that demanded his attention. But something made him slow his horse. He did not know why. His eyes moved calmly across the square the way they always did when he entered any place. He noticed everything without trying. The baker arguing over prices, the girl chasing a chicken across the stones, the old man arranging apples on a table. Then he saw her. Sebastian's breath stopped. She stood beside a jeweler's small table near the far wall of the square. Her back faced him, but he knew her immediately. Some people never changed in the memory of your mind, Iris Piton. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent around him. 3 years had passed since he last saw her. 3 years, 2 months, and a number of days. He had once counted carefully before forcing himself to stop. She looked thinner than he remembered. Her blue dress was simple muslin, nothing like the elegant gowns she used to wear when she attended gatherings with her father. Her dark hair was pinned neatly behind her neck with a ribbon that had loosened slightly on one side. A small, careless detail. She would have fixed it immediately if she had noticed. Sebastian remained perfectly still on his horse as he watched her. Iris placed something carefully on the jeweler's table. Her hands moved slowly, too carefully, as if she were forcing them to remain steady. The jeweler leaned forward and picked up the object. Pearl earrings. Even from across the square, Sebastian recognized them. His jaw tightened. Those pearls had once belonged to her grandmother. He remembered the day her father had given them to her. Lord Edmund Peaton had been ill even then, sitting weakly in his study chair as he placed the small velvet box in Iris's hands. Sebastian had been standing by the window that day. He had not been meant to witness the moment, but he had remained silent while the old man spoke. "They were your grandmother's," Lord Peaton had said softly. "She was the bravest woman I ever knew. I want you to have them." Sebastian remembered the way Iris had smiled through tears. Now those same earrings sat on a jeweler's cloth in the middle of a village market. The jeweler examined them closely before making an offer. Sebastian could not hear the number, but he saw Iris's shoulders shift slightly as she listened. Not a flinch. Something quieter than that. Acceptance. She nodded. No. The word formed clearly in Sebastian's mind. He dismounted before he even realized he had made the decision. The market slowly changed as he walked through it. People noticed him immediately. Conversations lowered. Postures straightened. The presence of a duke always carried its own quiet gravity. Sebastian ignored it. His eyes remained fixed on the jeweler's table. He reached it in less than a minute. The jeweler looked up first. His eyes widened when he recognized the tall figure standing before him. "Your Grace," the man said quickly. Iris turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 3 years of silence stood between them. She looked older than when he last saw her. Not by years, but by experience. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes that had not been there before. Yet she was still unmistakably Iris. Her chin remained lifted with quiet dignity. Her dark eyes met his without hesitation. "Lord Thornfield," she said calmly. The jeweler cleared his throat awkwardly. "Duke," he corrected softly. Iris did not change her words. She simply continued looking at Sebastian. He inclined his head slightly. "Lady Iris?" Her eyes moved briefly to the pearls on the table before returning to his face. "I was not aware you had returned to Somerset," she said. "I returned last week." Sebastian glanced at the jeweler. The man instantly stepped back, pretending to examine something else on his table. Sebastian looked down at the earrings. "These belonged to your grandmother." It was not a question. Iris's expression tightened for only a moment before her composure returned. "They are mine to do with as I choose." Her voice remained perfectly steady. "I do not believe the market of Dornfield Cross falls under your authority, Your Grace." "It does not," Sebastian agreed. A short silence followed. "I would like to purchase them," he said. The air between them shifted immediately. Iris studied him for a long moment. "They are not for sale to you." "They are for sale to whoever offers the proper price. You do not know what price he offered." I know it was not enough. For a brief second, frustration flashed across her face. Then she spoke his name. "Sebastian." The sound of it felt strangely unfamiliar after so many years. She seemed to realize it immediately, because her expression changed. "I did not come here for charity," she said quietly. "I do not require assistance." "I did not say you did." "Then what are you saying?" Sebastian studied her carefully. "I am saying those earrings should not be here." Then he reached into his coat and placed several banknotes on the jeweler's table. The amount was far greater than whatever the man had offered. Without looking away from Iris, he picked up the earrings and held them toward her. She stared at them in his open palm. For a moment, she did not move. "You cannot simply do that," she said. "I already have." Slowly, she reached forward and took them. Her fingers closed tightly around the pearls. "This changes nothing," she said. "I know." She looked at him directly then. The question in her eyes carried the weight of 3 unspoken years. "Why are you back?" she asked. Sebastian hesitated. "Thornfield Hall requires attention," he said calmly. "There are matters that should be handled in person rather than by letter." All of it was true. None of it was the full truth. Iris studied him for another moment, as if measuring the honesty of his answer. Then she nodded once. "Good day, Your Grace." She turned and walked across the market square without looking back. Sebastian remained standing beside the jeweler's empty table. The fog had begun to lift now. The square was full of voices and movement again. Life continued around him, as if nothing important had happened. But something had shifted. He could feel it. 3 years ago, he had believed distance was the right choice. Standing there in the market, Sebastian Vane began to suspect he had been terribly wrong. That afternoon, the north wing of Thornfield Hall was silent. Dust covered the old furniture that had been draped in white cloth. Tall windows let in thin gray light that stretched across the wooden floors. It was the kind of quiet that belonged to rooms that had not been used in years. Sebastian walked through the long hallway alone. He had told the staff not to follow him. No steward, no housekeeper, no polite company that required him to wear the careful expression the world expected from a duke. Today, he did not want witnesses. He stopped beside the tall window at the end of the corridor and looked out across the valley. Somewhere beyond those hills stood Pembridge Cottage. That was where Iris lived now. A small house she had moved into after the death of her husband, Lord Arthur Mercer. Sebastian knew far more about that cottage than he should. He had learned about it 4 months earlier, when quiet reports from his land steward reached him in London. At first, it had been simple information about tenant records and land accounts. But hidden between the lines had been something else. Debt. Serious debt. The Mercer estate had not been nearly as stable as everyone believed. Lord Mercer had left behind complicated accounts, unpaid loans, and creditors who were beginning to lose patience. Sebastian had known this for months, and he had done nothing. He rested 2 fingers against the cold glass of the window. Why? The answer was simple. Because helping Iris meant seeing her again. And for 3 years, Sebastian Vane had avoided that possibility with ruthless discipline. The memory returned to him clearly. 7 years earlier, in a quiet study that smelled of medicine and autumn air, Lord Edmund Peaton had been dying. The old man had called Sebastian into the room and spoken with the calm seriousness of someone who knew time was short. "Sebastian," he had said softly, "I trust you more than any man I know." Sebastian had stood beside the desk. "You honor me, sir. I want you to watch over Iris." The request had been simple. Watch over her, not marry her, not protect her from the world. Just watch over her. Sebastian had agreed without hesitation. "I will." 6 weeks later, Lord Peaton had died. 4 months after that, Iris had married Lord Mercer. The news had arrived in London as a short, formal letter. Sebastian had read it once. Then he had placed it on his desk and stared at it for a long time. In that moment, he had realized something with brutal clarity. He had been in love with Iris for 2 years, and she had never known. Sebastian closed his eyes briefly. His silence had seemed noble at the time, controlled, respectful. But it had changed nothing. She had chosen another life while he stood quietly at a distance. A knock sounded at the door behind him. Sebastian turned. Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway. "Your Grace, Mr. Cayfield is here." Sebastian nodded once. "Send him in." A few moments later, the steward entered carrying a folder. Cayfield was a tall, serious man who had managed Thornfield Estates for many years. He was known for precision and honesty. "Your Grace," he placed the folder on the desk. "You asked me to gather the current records for Pembridge Cottage." Sebastian opened the folder and began reading. Numbers filled the pages. Payments. Delays. Letters from creditors. The pattern was painfully clear. Iris had been fighting to keep everything afloat. Small payments here and there. Careful management. Quiet attempts to settle accounts before anyone noticed the severity of the problem. But the debts were larger than her resources. Sebastian reached the final page. A note written in Cayfield's careful handwriting rested at the bottom. A creditor in London named Halloway had sent 2 letters demanding immediate settlement. The second letter had arrived the previous week. Sebastian unfolded the attached copy. The words were polite, but the message was not. Legal action would begin if the debt was not paid soon. Sebastian read the letter slowly. Then he folded it once and placed it inside his coat pocket. "Thank you, Cayfield," he said calmly. The steward nodded and left the room. Sebastian remained alone. Night had fallen outside the windows. He thought about the market square, about Iris standing at that jeweler's table, about the steady way her hands had placed her grandmother's earrings on the cloth. He thought about the promise he had made to her father. Watch over her. For 3 years, he had told himself distance was honorable. Now he understood it had simply been easier. The rain began 3 days later, heavy gray rain that turned the roads of Somerset into rivers of mud. The valley became quiet and distant beneath low clouds. Sebastian spent those days working. He met with tenants, reviewed estate repairs, wrote letters to London. One of those letters went to a solicitor. Its language was careful and indirect, but its purpose was clear. Purchase the debt. Quietly, without announcement. On the 4th afternoon, the rain softened. Sebastian decided to ride out across the valley. The roads were still rough from the storm. Puddles filled the low paths, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth. He had almost reached the Fenwick Road when his horse suddenly stumbled. Sebastian pulled the reins and dismounted quickly. The animal was uninjured, but the deep hole in the road made the path ahead difficult. He looked around. Just ahead stood a small stone gate. Pembridge Cottage. Sebastian stared at it for a moment. This had not been his intention, but the rain had begun again, and the cottage was the nearest shelter. He pushed open the gate and walked to the door. A moment later it opened. Iris stood there. She clearly had not expected visitors. An ink stain marked her right hand, and she still held a pen. Her dark hair was loosely pinned, and a strand had slipped free beside her cheek. For a brief second, surprise crossed her face. "Your Grace," she said. "My horse encountered the road," Sebastian replied. "The ride back to Thornfield will be difficult until the rain passes." She looked past him toward the horse waiting beside the gate. "He appears unharmed." "He is." A small silence followed. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in." The cottage was warm and quiet inside. A small fire burned in the hearth. Books were stacked on a nearby table. A writing desk near the window held open letters and a large ledger. Iris crossed the room quickly and closed the ledger before he could see the pages. Sebastian pretended not to notice. She poured tea from a small pot and handed him a cup. "You have been managing things alone," he said. "I have been managing things well." "Those are different statements." She raised an eyebrow. "Are they?" "Yes." She studied him across the firelight. "What do you want, Sebastian?" He met her gaze. "Holloway and Sons," he said quietly. The air in the room changed instantly. Her shoulders stiffened. "How do you know about that?" "My steward manages the Pembridge tenant accounts." She looked down briefly at her cup. "I see." "Iris," he said gently, "you have no obligation to face this alone." Her voice sharpened. "I have every obligation." "You were selling your grandmother's earrings. That was one solution to a problem. There are better ones." Her eyes flashed. "I do not require rescue." Sebastian remained calm. "I did not say rescue." "Then what are you saying?" He held her gaze steadily. "I made a promise to your father," he said. The room fell silent. The fire crackled softly. Iris slowly placed her cup on the table. "What promise?" Sebastian watched her carefully. "To watch over you." For the first time since he arrived, her composure faltered slightly. Her eyes searched his face. Then she asked the question that had lived between them for 3 years. "Then why did you leave?" The question hung quietly in the small sitting room. "Then why did you leave?" The fire crackled softly between them, and the rain tapped gently against the windows of Pembridge Cottage. Sebastian did not answer immediately. He looked at Iris across the narrow space between their chairs. For years he had trained himself to remain composed in every situation. Diplomacy, responsibility, control. Those were things the world expected from the Duke of Thornfield. But this question was different. It required honesty. Finally he spoke. "Because staying was not something I trusted myself to do." Iris frowned slightly. "I do not understand." Sebastian rested his hands together calmly, though his voice carried a quiet weight. "When your father asked me to watch over you, I agreed without hesitation. I believed it was the right thing to do." "It was," she said softly. "Perhaps." He paused. But by the time he asked, something had already changed. Iris studied him carefully. "What do you mean?" Sebastian looked into the fire for a moment before answering. "I had already been in love with you for 2 years." The words settled into the room like something fragile. Iris went perfectly still. "You never said anything." "No." "Why not?" Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly. "Because I believed it would complicate your life." A faint, almost disbelieving laugh escaped her. "So you decided silence was easier?" "I decided silence was honorable. And when I married Lord Mercer," Sebastian met her gaze, I left. The truth of it sat plainly between them. Iris leaned back slowly in her chair, absorbing the words. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, she said quietly, "You believed I knew. I believed you did not feel the same." Her eyes widened slightly. "So you never asked?" "No." "And I," she said slowly, "believed your silence meant you felt nothing." The realization passed between them like a sudden shift of light. Years of misunderstanding suddenly stood clear. Sebastian exhaled quietly. "We were both very practical." Iris nodded, "and very foolish." For the first time since the conversation began, a small smile touched Sebastian's expression. "Yes." The rain outside had begun to soften. Iris stood and walked slowly toward the window. She looked out across the darkening fields. "My husband was a good man," she said quietly. "I know. I respected him." Sebastian did not interrupt. "But I was never in love with him." She turned back toward him. "I think now I understand why." Sebastian rose from his chair. The room felt smaller as he stepped closer. "Iris," he said softly, "I am not telling you this to change your life again." She held his gaze. "You are telling me because it is the truth." "Yes." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "How long?" 7 years, and the number seemed to settle in the air between them. 7 years, she repeated softly. "Since the winter of 1807. For a moment she said nothing. Then she laughed quietly, shaking her head. 7 years of silence. "I know. You are a very disciplined man, Sebastian. So I have been told." She walked slowly back toward the chair, but did not sit. Instead, she stood beside him. "And what do we do with 7 years now?" Sebastian answered without hesitation. "We begin again." Her expression softened. "Begin what?" He looked directly into her eyes. "Everything." The simplicity of the answer made her breath catch slightly. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she nodded. "All right." Sebastian reached out slowly and took her hand. She did not pull away. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The next weeks passed quietly across Thornfield County. Sebastian remained at Thornfield Hall rather than returning to London. He began overseeing the restoration of the North Wing himself, spending long afternoons reviewing plans and meeting with builders. But there was another change everyone noticed. Lady Iris was often seen at Thornfield. Sometimes she arrived to discuss the restoration plans. Other days, she came simply to read in the library or walk through the gardens. Neither of them rushed anything. 7 years of distance could not be undone in a single moment. But something had changed. One afternoon in early spring, they walked together through the Thornfield Gardens. The roses had just begun to bloom along the old stone wall. Iris paused beside one of the bushes and touched a small pink blossom. "My father loved this garden," she said quietly. Sebastian stood beside her. "He spoke about you often." She looked at him. "He admired you, your sense of duty, your determination." Sebastian gave a faint smile. "He was very generous. He was very precise." And the late afternoon sun warmed the garden around them. Iris turned toward him slowly. "You kept your promise," she said. Sebastian shook his head. "Not well. But you are here now." He looked at her carefully. "Yes." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sebastian spoke again. "Iris, there is something I would like to ask you." She watched him quietly. "Ask." He took a slow breath. "I intend to remain in Somerset. Thornfield Hall will be my home again." Her eyes softened slightly. "I am glad. But that is not the question." He reached for her hand again. "I would like you to share that life with me." Iris looked surprised. "In what way?" Sebastian's voice was steady. in every way. Realization slowly appeared in her expression. You are proposing. I am. She glanced around the quiet garden. You chose to do this beside a rose bush. It seemed appropriate. A warm laugh escaped her. You could have chosen the library. I thought about it. But I have spent 7 years waiting for the correct moment. He held her gaze. There is no perfect moment. Silence settled gently around them. Finally, Iris spoke. Yes. The word was simple but certain. Sebastian exhaled slowly. He stepped closer and rested his forehead lightly against hers. For a moment they simply stood there among the roses. 7 years, she murmured. 7 years, he agreed. I expect you intend to make up for them. I do. She smiled, and if you become too serious again, I will remind you of this moment. I would expect nothing less. Sebastian lifted her hand and kissed it gently. Then he kissed her. The weeks that followed gave Thornfield County plenty to discuss. The Duke of Thornfield had returned permanently. Lady Iris Mercer was seen frequently beside him at markets, dinners, and long rides through the valley. And whenever people noticed the pearl earrings she wore, they often noticed something else as well. The way the Duke looked at her. Not as a distant nobleman observing society, but as a man who had once almost lost the woman he loved and had no intention of letting that happen again.